Howdy, howdy, it's AL-BINO. So, Matthew Cox did a video a few weeks ago where he was talking to somebody who is familiar with the cartels. Matthew Cox should have broken the internet with this, but apparently the algorithm doesn't agree. So during his discussion with the people, or with this individual who is familiar with the cartels, this individual discussed the different Mexican cartels, and that what we know as, or what we perceive as the villain, the Sinaloa cartel, functioned more like the Italian mafia did back in the day, where they did dabble in politics here and there. But for the most part, they kept their business on the down low. And they just did what they did. And they didn't involve civilians, and they didn't involve politicians and all that other stuff. They just did what they did. Which was a problem within itself, because it involved trafficking drugs and narcotics and stuff like that. When they had their little wars, they kept it amongst themselves. I lived in Douglas, Arizona back in 2014 when Chapo was captured. And after Chapo was captured, all hell broke loose. I remember in the apartment that I was living in, waking up about 0.8 of a mile from the border wall there, finding bullet holes in my ceiling from stray bullets that were coming over the fence and all this other stuff. But that wasn't Chapo, because once Chapo was removed, their version of Omerta was removed. And who was the one that went after Chapo? Barack Obama. Okay? Now, during the Obama administration and during the Biden administration, outside of the terrible economy and the leftist political policies that those men championed, what was one of the biggest issues? Immigration, human trafficking. During the Obama administration, there was problems with Fast and Furious, with the federal government facilitating running weapons into Mexico, Border Patrol agents being killed, Mexican federales being killed, Mexican police being killed, Mexican civilians being killed, American civilians being killed in border towns, all that stuff. This all started to happen immediately before and shortly after Chapo Guzman was captured and the Sinaloa cartel was broken up. That was the cartel that was kind of functioning like the Italian mob, right? They, kind of kept their business on the down low. They threw money to politicians to turn a blind eye, but it was, well, like the Italian mob. But there was another cartel in Jalisco, the New Generation cartel. And after Chapo was removed or weakened, El Menche in Jalisco blew up. This was during the Obama administration. And Trump, with his border wall and his border policies, slowed it down. Didn't put all to it, but slowed it down considerably. And then it blew wide open again under the Biden administration. Did anybody ever wonder why? So the New Generation cartel, which is the predominant cartel in Mexico today, does this. So you want to own a factory in Mexico. Okay, well, in order for them to prevent something bad happening to your factory, you have to give El Menche a piece. You want to truck your supplies to the port to be sent to China or to the border to be sent to the United States. Well, you have to give them a piece. You own an avocado farm or a fruit farm, and you want to harvest your orchard, and you don't want anything bad to open or to happen to your orchard. You have to give them a piece. That's on the Mexican side. You want your candidate to win an election, and you don't want him to have something bad happen to him. You have to give them a piece. This is all over Mexico. So you want to come across Mexico from Guatemala and enter the United States, you have to give them a piece. You're a Border Patrol agent, and you don't want something bad to happen to your family, you have to give them a piece. You want to sponsor somebody coming into the United States, and that person has to come through Mexico to get here. You have to give them a piece. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel is the wealthiest organized crime organization in the world by the order of trillions with the T dollars. Because all commerce in Mexico, all commerce going out of Mexico to the United States or other places, they have a racket on. All industry, production, they have a racket on. All human immigration across Mexico, they have a racket on. All law enforcement in Mexico, they have a racket on. On a lot of law enforcement along the Mexican border, they have a racket on. So if they have these trillions of dollars, if they want to influence American political policy so that way they can conduct their white slave trade, human trafficking, their drug trade, with minimum resistance, first thing you're going to do is you're going to remove your competition, which prohibits you from doing things like that within the underworld. That would have been Joaquin Chapo Guzman. Believe it or not, Chapo was actually a good guy in this. Yeah, he was an underworld guy, but he was a good guy. The next thing you would do was you would find a way to launder money to American politicians who would facilitate your activities in Mexico and over the international border. Where would you launder your money through? I just find it awfully weird that the same man who wanted to secure our border, and actually, while he was in power, was working with Mexico to help them secure their border with Guatemala and secure their country. That same man, when he started looking into certain Democrat politicians and their families' activities in Ukraine, and billions of dollars flowing through that country to certain people. That's right, I said billions with a B. that he faced impeachment in 2019. I just find it awful funny that the two Democratic presidents on either side of this individual had no problem with an open border. I just find it awful funny that once he left office, very quickly, one Barack Hussein Obama went from being a man of modest means of a few $1 million to being a billionaire. And you can't tell me that's by making speeches and selling books. I just find it awful funny that the Biden family also has had inexplicable or unexplainable, I can't talk, big words, high school diploma, big words, has found just an unbelievable windfall. And that his border czar, Kamala Harris, did nothing. Have you heard about all the missing Native Americans on the Navajo reservation? Thousands of them that they can't find. Many of them trafficked into Arizona, into rehab facilities, and perhaps across the Mexican border, and then re-trafficked into the United States, as God knows who. Have you heard about the 325,000 children that we know about who are in this country and nobody knows where they are, from Latin America or other places? And we suspect that they might be white slaves. Have you heard about the immigrants who are working in places like a Tyson chicken plant? Oh wait, they're linked to the Obamas and the Clintons, aren't they? Yeah, they are. Come up to places like eastern Colorado and Nevada, forced to work in these factories for a minuscule wage. And that if you talk to them privately, they say that they have a debt to pay. But it seems that they can never really pay that debt off to whom? To what organization that facilitated them being up here in the first place? Have you heard about Colonial Ridge? Where they're getting all that money from? Texas. Have you heard about all of these Haitians that are coming up here and being flown all over the place? Did it strike anybody that maybe somehow or another that's being facilitated by this cabal as well, El Menche, and his organization with trillions of dollars that he raised by racketeering trade? By trading in white slaves. Have you heard about that? Awful funny, ain't it? I wonder where George Soros is getting a lot of his money from. You mean to tell me that the man keeps funding all these causes with money that he just raised on the stock market? Warren Buffett doesn't even have that type of money, nor does Elon Musk. Where's it all coming from, guys? And what was Fast and Furious really? Because were they running guns to Sinaloa or somewhere else? Who were they running cover for? I'm just asking some questions because Matthew Cox brought this guy up and he shed a whole bunch of light on the situation. And the algorithm, I saw it posted once, advertised in my feed once on YouTube, and I never saw it again. And I listened to the full video and my jaw dropped because of what's been going on over the last, well, ever since Obama took office. I wonder if some of that money that was laundered through Ukraine also went to China as well, and somehow or another is finding its way back into people's pockets here. Do I mean to tell you that the Democrat Party is in bed with the New Generation cartel in Mexico? And that everything in the PRI in Mexico, which is their version of the Democrat Party, is the same? And everything that's going on in both of these countries right now, currently, as a result of that? Tell you something. They paint Donald Trump as the racist when he's not. I've said this before. Donald Trump, by securing this country, is also securing Mexico too. Because he's doing one of two things. He's either forcing the Mexican government to deal with the problem on their side before they come into our country, because by them traipsing across the Mexican countryside, you could imagine what's going on there. Their situation is probably worse, which we all know it is. Or, once he gets in power and he secures our border, he's willing to work with them to secure their border, because good fences make good neighbors, and good neighbors work together. So, what parties would be interested in seeing that not come to be? Rush Limbaugh used to say, and many wise people of yore used to say, follow the money. Occam's razor. I know a lot of people on the Border Patrol. Many of them have retired or quit, but they tell me things like most of the people coming across that border are what they call OTNs, other than Mexicans. They tell me that the honest people, federales, will tell them that this problem is paid for by both the New Generation cartel and our Democrat Party. I was going to pull up a bunch of whiteboards and do the Glenn Beck thing, but life hasn't permitted me the time to do this, but I can do this by asking a series of questions. And I strongly encourage everybody who hears this to go look at Matthew Cox Speaks with a Cartel Member or Cartel Associate, former Cartel Associate. Go look that video up on YouTube. Sometimes I don't agree with Matthew Cox's opinions. In some cases, to me, he is like Peter Zeihan. Sometimes he puts out great information and has crap opinions. But this one I have to endorse, because Matthew Cox really blew the lid off of this. And from what I can tell, just by my feed, should still be coming up in my algorithm. I don't see it much anymore. Excuse me, I'm drinking a Pepsi. He made this video about 3 weeks ago. At least I saw it 3 weeks ago. If everybody were to view this and put two and two together, it would blow the lid off of a lot of things very quickly. You ever wonder why those people are getting so much money in their food stamps and everything else? You don't think that some of those people are paying that remittance back to that cartel as part of the racket? Now remember, I told you that they get a piece of the farmer, they get a piece of the factory, they get a piece of the trucking companies down there, they get a piece of everything down in Mexico, right? Who's to say that they don't get a piece of the immigrants that they brought up here? It's some debt that those people will never pay off. And the Democrat side of the agreement is we'll just give them lots of money through benefits, and as part of a remittance, they send a portion of that back, a percentage of that back to that racket. And then that money on the backside is filtered through Ukraine, or now Lebanon, into the pockets of certain powerful people like, the Obamas, the Bidens. Y'all remember the scandal with Clinton and Haiti? Maybe them too. Just so that you know, I'm not suicidal. Just an average guy who, I was always wondering, okay, why are all these crazy things happening? And why, when one guy back in 2019 decided to look into one country, he wound up almost losing his presidency. Why that was such a touchy subject? Why that border wall and securing the border and all these other things are so touchy? There was always a missing link. It's the money, stupid. That cartel makes a profit on every item, every person that moves through Mexico into the United States. And while they're here, they still make money on them. I'd say this, other than the criminals who are here, which I believe Tren de Aragua is linked to that cartel. They probably are working together. Matter of fact, given what I know now, I can say with a certainty that they are. The ones that are taking over apartment complexes in Denver. Y'all putting this together? I feel for those who aren't involved in the criminal element and are sold a bill of goods to come up here and are getting these huge checks, they're probably having to send 50% of it back or 30% of it back to their handlers, and they'll never pay their debt off. Those people are slaves. I feel sorry for them. Didn't we fight a civil war over ending this stuff? And now these Democrats have found a way to bring slavery back into this country. What the hell? And the money changing hands with El Menche of New Generation Cartel and New Generation Cartel's enforcers up here are Tren de Aragua. Who's on the take? Everybody. But the American citizens, the illegal immigrants who are here, and the undocumented ones who are the chattel, the property of this whole charade. Oh, Democrats, they just can't let go, can they? See why they're so mad at you black folk? Because you dared to buck the plantation again. So now they're going to replace you. The story is that these people do jobs that Americans won't do. Oh, no. They're doing the jobs that Americans would be willing to do for a reasonable wage. If you paid me enough, I'd go out and pick peaches. Yeah, that's right. Those people are picking peaches and almonds and pecans and chilies and cotton. So you mean the Democrats are involved in the slave trade again? And since black people won't bow to Jim Crow or be sharecroppers or be slaves themselves or tenant farmers themselves, and they won't be serfs, they're going to do the Margaret Sanger thing, try to convince them to attrition themselves out and then replace them. Tiger never changes its stripes, does it, y'all? Tiger never changes its stripes. Kind of makes me wonder because we know the Arabs and some of the other tribes in the Sahel in Africa were the ones that traded the slaves to the slave traders that either took them into Arabia or into Brazil or into the Caribbean or to Mexico or to the United States. But I wonder now if, I'm sure a lot of it on the African side was, well, this tribe conquered this tribe and gathered these people up and took them to the dogs to be sold as slaves. Okay, yeah, I believe that happened. But I wonder if a similar cartel was an operation funded by people like the Democrats and the Spanish Empire and the Portuguese Empire at the time. If there were black people in Africa who were promised that, hey, there's this great place called the United States, or there's this great continent called South America or North America, where they're discovering these great things, and if you come with me, and we'll send you over there, and you'll be free, and then you'll be able to send your money back to your family here in Africa or whatever. A version of that. I don't think you couldn't wire money back then, but whatever, right? Or you'll just get a better life. And then once they got on the ship and got put on the block, they were told, well, you're just never going to pay this debt back, so you're just going to have to work it off. And then they never worked it. See, I wonder if that was a similar cartel, and if that's why the British in the 19th century impressed American sailors, so-called, into their navy, or Brazilian sailors into their navy, because they were trying to bust up a cartel, which is why we kind of fell into the War of 1812. I wonder if the British at the time were trying to bust up that cartel. It just, it makes you take a second look at history. It's just like, and angry man, I don't know, maybe you're just not looking at your PayPals, or maybe this is too controversial, or maybe it pissed you off because you think I'm trying to assign something to somebody that, and you're like, no, this guy's full of shit, right? But when you started talking about Obama, I was like, I remember Judge Joe Brown mentioning in passing one time that if Obama was the first black president, that's not the case. It's likely Abraham Lincoln. And I was like, wait a minute. Abraham Lincoln said nice things about his mom, but the only thing we know history about as far as Abraham Lincoln's family is his father. And we don't hear very much about his mother, Nancy, about where she came from and all this other stuff. Well, I dug into it, and at one point in time, the official narrative was that she was from Virginia gentry, but that's not true. Now, we know that the man that married her mother after Nancy Lincoln's mother was already born, and that her father was unknown. She was born in the South, either in Kentucky or Virginia, we're not sure. But one of the practices in the South was when an illegitimate child was born, if the father was not white, the father was not listed, spoken about. We also know that even though her mother later married after she was born, her stepfather had a nasty habit of hiring her out to work as a domestic or as a seamstress all through her childhood and her teenage years, through various different houses in Virginia and Kentucky. Like she was a house slave. We know that we can't really find a reliable record in a church or in a state or county registry or anything like that in Virginia or Kentucky of her ever being legally married to Thomas Lincoln, which would be Abraham Lincoln's father. We know that, while Nancy Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's mother, was alive and cohabitating with Abraham Lincoln's father, that he was unable to buy property or vote in either Virginia or Kentucky. We know that Abraham Lincoln's mother died of what they call milk poisoning, which is extremely rare. Not dysentery, milk poisoning, meaning that she was poisoned to death when Abraham Lincoln was 10 years old. And then that after that, Abraham Lincoln's father took all three of their children, moved across the Ohio River into Indiana, which is north of the Mason-Dixon line, and there in Indiana, he could finally buy land there. And then later on in Illinois, and then Lincoln obviously started his business and everything in Illinois. We now know that Abraham Lincoln, for a Caucasian man of his day, was extraordinarily tall. He had unusual features for a Caucasian man, even though he had lighter skin. And he was also known to be a very prodigious, very strong boxer, a very strong wrestler. He was a very strong athlete. They also called him the rail splitter because he could go out and do manual labor with stamina that for that day generally would be attributed as being above average for the regular Caucasian man of his day. And then our first Republican president, even though he said that he primarily wanted to preserve the Union, always argued, in the Douglas debates, always argued as an ardent abolitionist, anti-slavery. Now, mind you, he grew up and was raised until he was 10 years old in the South. Unusual position for a supposed white Southerner. Unless he wasn't completely white. We know that Fort Sumter, South Carolina, even though after the cessation of all the rest of the southern states, the federal garrison remained at Fort Sumter, in that one little skirmish, now it seems almost as if that was his, oh, please give me a reason. And once the Confederates attacked that small garrison, it was on like Donkey Kong with him. And every time every time Congress, his cabinet, popular opinion, begged him to let off on that Civil War, he would not do it. And he fired general after general after general after general who would not win for him. Almost as if he had a mad on to break the slavery system of the antebellum South. To the point to where it cost him his life. See, the more I study on that, the more I study on Abraham Lincoln's paternal lineage, going back to his mother's mysteriously unknown father and how she was treated, and his family was treated while she was alive in the South. Barack Obama, I don't think you were our first black president at all. I believe, this is just my personal belief, that the reason Abraham Lincoln went so goddamn hard in the paint to free black people and prosecute that Civil War and bring it into slavery was because, at the very least, he was 1/4 a black man, even though he looked white or had white skin. But I believe, just by what I've studied, that if I'm not crazy, I could be wrong. I may be absolutely crazy, but if I'm right, I believe that sheds a huge light on his motives, his passion, and the fact that our first Republican president could very well have been our first black president too, even though he looked, or even though he had the light skin of a white man. It just, the more I read on this, again, I could be mistaken, and the more I try to put together in my mind, okay, well, why don't we know about this? Or why did these things happen like this? And then you put that up against the picture and the known culture of the antebellum South, or antebellum South. And you're just like, oh, okay. All right, it's anecdotal, but it's got to be this. It can't be anything else. Why was Nancy Lincoln's father such a big secret? Why did Abraham Lincoln, for a white man, look so different? Even though, I mean, we know black men are typically larger than, and for the most part have more testosterone and more physical stamina than their Caucasian, on average. There are exceptions, but on average have more physical stamina than their Caucasian counterparts. That's not racism, that's just how it is, right? On average. Not always, but on average. That means, average means that there's people on either side, but on average, right? And I mean, you look at pictures of him compared to his white contemporaries, they had photographs of him, right? Compared to his white contemporaries of the day, and he's like, wow, he's just looks different. And then you hear about how strong he was, even though he was really skinny and tall. You know, he didn't have Marfan's disease. He was known to be pretty healthy. I mean, it's just, you start sliding puzzle pieces together, and I'm like, okay, maybe there's a quiet part of history that's been kept quiet on purpose. And maybe, Honest Abe was a mulatto who remembered his mother's story. And although he couldn't come right out and say it, but by living certain things, doing certain things, he did, you know, he did his best to make that right. It's kind of like Matthew Cox and his cartel thing, right? So, kind of funny that we're talking about another American Civil War. And these evil Democrats are importing a different slave class now because they lost their other slave class. And it's like the same type, not the same cartel, but the same type of cartel setup. Okay, well, some money person gathers people from somewhere else, sends them through someone else, and someone always gets a kickback, and just, wow. I bet you the man who I believe was the grandson, the illegitimate, but still grandson of a black man we'll never know about, possibly, who became president and tried to make it right and died doing so to free people from slavery, is just spinning in his grave right now. Because the man that I believe was our first black president, Abraham Lincoln, in a very real sense, not in a symbolic sense, in a real sense. Everything that he aspired to, and those who took the mantle after him and before him, has been undone. And now we seriously could be looking at another civil conflict again, involving that same Democrat Party again. And part of that conflict involves a form of human trafficking through a cartel again. Maybe humans are stupid and we don't learn from history. This is AL-BINO signing out.